The WBA is a very, very confusing organization. If you don't know, the main sanctioning bodies or the main titles in boxing these days are the WBC, the WBA, the IBF, and the WBO. We're going to focus on the WBA right now because the WBA, out of all of those, are the most confusing. The IBF is very known for stripping you. If you don't fight your mandatory, the IBF will strip you. Most recently, Tyson Fury. When it comes to the WBO, there's some leniency, but if you don't fight your mandatory, they will strip you. When it comes to the WBC, you know, it's still a question of, you know, if their organization is governed by money or actually the boxers, if you get where I'm going with this. I'm T Street Controversy. This is T Street Controversy Live. The president of the WBA, Gilberto Mendoza, has been very open with answering fans' questions on his Twitter page. I'm going to put his link right down below in the description box, and saying that when it comes to the WBA, their goal is to have one belt. The WBA has a Super World title, which Tyson Fury holds, and a world title, which Ruslan Chagayev holds. Now, when it comes to the heavyweights, the WBA is having a tournament. Some of these names you may know, some of these names you may not know. You got Tyson Fury taking on Vladimir Klitschko in a rematch for the WBA Super World. You got Luis Ortiz taking on Alexander Ustinov, very intriguing fight in my opinion, for the WBA interim. You got Lucas Brown versus Ruslan Chagayev for the WBA World, and then you got the winner, who has to face Franz Okendo. And basically, out of those names I just mentioned, one of those guys is going to be the only WBA champion of the world by, I'm going to say, the beginning of 2017. Now, when it comes to Tyson Fury himself, he wants to fight Deontay Wilder, you know, to unify the titles. But when it comes to this whole WBA mandatory thing that they're trying to do with this tournament, you know, he has really little room to do so. But that's a whole different video. We're going to focus on the WBA right now. Now, what the WBA is saying, or Gilberto Mendoza is saying, is that they're going to get rid of the WBA World or as it's otherwise known, regular title. So if you don't know what that means is, when it comes to 147 pounds and 154 pounds, they are vacant now, or not yet vacant, but the WBA is going to be taking those titles away from Floyd Mayweather sometime within the next couple of weeks. But Floyd Mayweather was the WBA Super World Champion at 147. Keith Thurman, WBA World Champion at 147. Floyd Mayweather, 154 pounds, Super World Champion. Erislandy Lara, 154 pound World Champion. So you can expect for Erislandy Lara to be elevated up to Super World Champion once the WBA decides to take the belts from Mayweather. Also, when it comes to Keith Thurman is going to be elevated up to Super World Champion. Now, let's look at the other divisions. Now, when it comes to the WBA, at 175, you got Sergey Kovalev and Jürgen Breimer. Those two are going to have to fight, because if they're going to get rid of the title, if they're going to get rid of the regular title, then you might as well just make the regular champions fight the Super World Champions. When it comes to I'm just going to go through divisions that you know for sure, or divisions where it makes the most, like, well, basically where the fights mean the most. When it comes to 160 pounds, you got Gennady Golovkin versus Danny Jacobs. Them two was at a WBA convention where they took a picture together. And I'm thinking, okay, if the WBA is really going to get rid of the WBA regular titles, then I want to see, will they make Golovkin versus, or will they order Golovkin versus Danny Jacobs? It's a perfect fight right now for both fighters, and I just want to see if the WBA are going to put their money where their mouth is, because you have Chris Eubank Jr., who's the WBA interim champion. Well, he's not the WBA. Here's the thing. He's not the WBA interim champion anymore. Some other guy is. I forgot his name, but he's the #1 contender for Danny Jacobs, but not Gennady Golovkin. So I want to see what they're going to do with that situation. When it comes to 122 pounds, remember, they stripped Rigondeaux, the WBA Super World Champion, and said basically the winner of Scott Quigg, who's the WBA World Champion, versus Carl Frampton, has to fight Guillermo Rigondeaux. So when you look at the divisions, I can see how within a year they can completely eliminate that WBA world title if they enforce their mandatories. For example, You got Adrian Broner, who's the WBA Super World Champion. He leapfrogged Jose Benavidez, who was the WBA interim, and then elevated to the WBA World. But Adrian Broner was political with the political bullshit and the reason somehow Adrian Broner was able to leapfrog Jose Benavidez to become the WBA Super World Champion when Jose Benavidez should have been next in line. So it's good news for the WBA, because when it comes to both of these titles, it makes no sense, and it's just, it clouds up the division even more, because when you're a WBA World Champion, not Super World Champion, you can't unify with the WBC or the IBF or the WBO. Now, I don't know how they're doing Scott Quigg versus Carl Frampton, because Scott Quigg doesn't have the full WBA belt. And a lot of people are saying the reason why Guillermo Rigondeaux got stripped of the WBA Super World belt was so they can make Scott Quigg versus Carl Frampton a unification fight. So I'm interested to see what the WBA is going to do in 2016. They already got the tournament for the heavyweight setup. Now they need to do a tournament for the world title at 160 pounds. And also, I want to see what they're going to do with Adrian Broner versus Jose Benavidez, because they did order that the winner of Adrian Broner versus Alok Verdiev was supposed to fight the winner of Jose Benavidez versus Michel De Rocco or Morocco, whatever his name is. And we haven't heard anything from them since. So I want to see if the WBA is going to enforce their rules and actually get rid of that bullshit WBA world belt, because it really doesn't make any sense in this point in time in boxing, especially with the education that the fans have now of these belts and knowing that that belt doesn't mean anything. It's they need to get rid of it, because how do you have a WBA world champion and then an interim champion, and then at one point in time at 160 pounds, just a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a few weeks ago, they had two interim champions at 160 pounds, a world champion and a super world champion. It just seems like to me that they're out to collect sanctioning fees. But it is what it is. It's good, that they're going to be enforcing their, we'll put it this way. We don't know if they're going to be enforcing their mandatories, but it's good to hear that the WBA is on the right path in trying to eliminate some of these pointless titles. I'm T Street Controversy. This is T Street Controversy Live. I cover every single major fight live. Please subscribe.